Okay. President, fellows and guests, thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to come and talk to you today about John Lubbock, his collections and his connections with Darwin and his disciples. Not only is it the 100-year anniversary of the passing of the 1913 Ancient Monuments Act, it's also the centenary of John Lubbock's death in, again, 28th of May 1913, so a very appropriate date, I think, for this presentation. In October 1907, Sir John Lubbock remarks in his diary that he has arranged for the names of his old scientific friends to be hand-painted on the doors of his family residence of Kingsgate Castle near Ramsgate. Darwin, Hooker, Evans, Busk and Grant.
John was 73 years old and president of the Society of Antiquaries when he embarked on this act of reminiscence. But would John select these 7 names, and what connection between them existed, if any? This seemingly simple and intimate act is hugely informative. It harks back to an exciting time many decades before, when John worked with these people to help transform our understanding of the natural world and human antiquity. It tells us that these scientific friendships and events of over 40 years previously were of great personal significance to John. He was proud and fond of these associations and all that they achieved. Perhaps he regarded these friendships and the achievements represented as an important aspect of his own legacy as he looked back over his life during his twilight years. The focus of these friendships was the emotive, scientific, religious and philosophical debate triggered by the publication of Darwin's On the Origin of Species in November 1859. This seminal publication was received by a society divided in various ways between those who refuted Darwin and those who were converted, at least in part, to his ideas and the ideas of others on evolution and Darwin's ideas on natural selection, and all that that might mean for late Victorian society. Charles Darwin had moved into Down House in 1842, next door to High Elms, where a young boy lived called John Lubbock, the eldest son in a wealthy banking family. In his teenage years, John developed a very close relationship with Darwin and became his scientific apprentice. The name of Darwin is, of course, internationally known across the world. However, it is less well known that over the next 2 decades, a group of professional and amateur scientists and antiquarians championed Darwin and his take on evolution, whilst applying their own agendas to the debate. It could be argued, indeed, that it is through their efforts that Darwin's work became so successfully marketed and considered of value within the scientific and wider community, even into modern times. This grouping consisted of 2 main sets of friendships and associations. The X Club, as it was called, whose members were John Lubbock, Joseph Hooker, Thomas Huxley, John Tyndall, George Busk, all on here, and joined by William Spottiswoode, Herbert Spencer, Edward Frankland and Thomas Hurst. The second set of friendships was the Lubbock-Evans network, which included John Lubbock, John Evans, and Augustus Rivers, Augustus Franks. The door names at Kingsgate Castle perhaps reflect Lubbock's closest friendships within this mix, and certainly mirror the central pivotal role that John played in linking the work of both. The final painted name, Grant Duff, hints a little perhaps at why John was so valuable in this mix. John, important amateur scientist with strong research interests in entomology, archaeology and botany, for example. And he was a wealthy man with connections into the City of London banking community. However, very importantly, he was an energetic Liberal Member of Parliament from 1870 onwards, who supported the work of Darwin, Huxley, Hooker and others as a strong intellectual champion within the political corridors of power. Sir Mount Stuart Elphinstone Grant Duff was a close friend of John and a fellow Liberal MP in the 1870s. Today I'm going to very briefly outline some of the work of the X Club and Lubbock Evans Network and examine through Lubbock's collections and with reference to the painted names at Kingsgate, how the importance of relationships lies behind the power these intellectual groupings had to change and shape our perception of the world we live in. The X Club was formally established as a dining club in 1994
by a select group of 9 intellectuals who supported Darwin and his theories of evolution, and who held the belief that science should be separated from religious doctrine. Membership, as I've said, included Lubbock, Hooker, Huxley, Tyndall and Busk. The Lubbock Evans Network was an informal grouping of like-minded antiquarians and archaeologists. Both groups shared many things: their desire to place science and research on a professional footing, their ambition to transform and open up the scientific and intellectual establishment in London, their activity in human antiquity and the analysis of surviving fossils and artefacts, and the importance they placed on scientific education. During the 2 decades following Darwin's publication of Origin, these agents of change in archaeology and science published key works, as this slide shows, that developed Darwinist and evolutionary thinking in a range of areas, including comparative anatomy, zoology, prehistoric archaeology, ethnography, entomology, geology and botany. They also worked together to lobby for a new intellectual world order for science and society. The X Club was particularly interested in transforming the powerful heavyweight of the London scientific community, the Royal Society. Founded in the mid-17th century as a radical organisation by renowned intellectuals including Christopher Wren and Robert Boyle, the Society set itself the objective of improved natural knowledge. Approximately it had become, in the eyes of Darwin's disciples, a conservative organisation. By the end of the 19th century, it had been transformed into a forward-thinking, professional and re-energised scientific body. The X Club members and Evans were vital agents in causing this change, not only through their publications and lectures, but also in their work to influence the establishment. Darwin had been elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society on the 24th of January 1839. Hooker was elected almost 10 years later, in 1847, Busk and Huxley in 1850, Tyndall in 1852, and John Lubbock in 1858. Evans was elected a Fellow in 1864, undoubtedly with the support of John and his X Club companions. In November 1864, the X Club succeeded in persuading the Royal Society to award the Copley Medal to Darwin. During 1860 to 68, at least 2 members of the X Club, plus Evans, were elected each year to serve on the Royal Society Council, as this slide shows. Their successful nominations seeming to take place in planned rotation. The names in bold on this slide are those painted on the doors at Kingsgate Castle. Their interest and influence in the Royal Society appears to have waned a little towards the end of the 1860s, but in October 1870 there is evidence for a sudden burst of X Club activity. The long-standing treasurer of the Royal Society died,
creating a vacancy which Darwin's brothers-in-arms grasped as an opportunity for change. They helped to support Spottiswood's nomination as Treasurer and Vice President. In the same year, 3 members of the ex-club, John, Lubbock and Hooker, were elected to the council. Hurst and Busk and Lubbock were elected to the council. Busk, Hurst and Hooker were elected in 1872. Huxley became secretary and John a vice president. In 1873, the ex-club dominance of the Royal Society was secured when Joseph Hooker was elected president, Huxley was secretary, and Spottiswoode was treasurer. John Evans was elected to the council. Hooker served a 5-year term as president and was replaced in succession by Spottiswoode in 1878 and Huxley in 1883. The emerging intellectual Darwinist powerhouse had an international dimension and played a key role in setting up the International Congress of Anthropology and Archaeology. The annual 1966.
Chaired by the Swiss geologist Pierre-Jean-Edouard Dessour. In 1868, the Congress met in Britain. The membership of the organising committee, chaired by John, reflects how by this time prehistoric archaeology was firmly in the domain of the Darwinists, who were keen to promote its importance to the wider debate on human evolution. John was emerging as a natural leader of the prehistoric movement within this Darwinist fellowship. His collecting activity during this period sheds further light on the linchpin role he played in this wider brotherhood. Just like painting the names of his old scientific friends on the doors at Kingsgate was a mark of personal relationship, so collecting between friends can be a symbolic transaction of something more intimately shared. By the time of his death in 1913, John had amassed a personal collection of well over 1,300 prehistoric and ethnographic artefacts that he used throughout his adult life to support the development of his ideas on human antiquity. He acquired this material from nearly 400 individual transactions. The nature of a transaction would vary. He would receive gifts, buy material from commercial dealers, and sometimes collect artefacts directly from archaeological sites. John's immediate circle of friends was a major source of items for his collection, accounting for 65 transactions in total. 39 of these involved key members of the ex-club and Lubbock Evans network: John Evans, Joseph Hooker, George Busk, Augustus Franks, and Augustus Pitt Rivers. These 5 compatriots sent John parcels by mail and perhaps brought artefacts in small cardboard boxes or cloth bags to social gatherings and society meetings. Here, they might have been the focus of conversation for a while with a small group of people in the room. These artefacts are vested with meaning for the giver and the recipient, associated with the scientific, but also with an active reinforcing of a personal bond through a sense of understanding, consideration and reciprocity. A bond that perhaps inspired John Lubbock in his later years to paint names on doors as an act of reflection in an intimate domestic space. John Evans was a particularly important collecting companion for John. They travelled together in Europe during the 1860s and entered into successful collecting partnerships, which included the acquisition jointly of significant prehistory collections from Denmark and commissioned excavations at the Haustadt Iron Age Cemetery in Austria. Evans also donated material to John on 11 separate occasions during the period 1863 to 81. When John and his first wife Nellie visited Evans' home in June 1865, Evans probably gave him a selection of stone tools that he had discovered on the shores of Loch Ness in Ireland.
Evans' pocket notebook, covering the period 1868, includes scribbled notes from his travels in Austria, England, France, Switzerland and Germany, reproduced here. One of the small yellow-white pages contains this entry, written as a list. The entries 355 to 9 in John's catalogue of his collection record the acquisition of a winged axe and sickles from Cammery, Saxony, bought for me by J. Evans, 1866. John also contributed to Evans' collection. In 1868, he gave Evans 3 bronze implements he had bought in a small antique shop in Naples during a trip in April of that year. He also donated to Evans 3 cores found in the Rory Hills in the Sindh region of India in 1876, just as 2 examples. Joseph Hooker presented John with gifts for his collection on occasions during the
67 to 73. All the material he donated probably originated from his global network of contacts set up to develop the Museum of Ecuador Botanical Gardens, Kew, where he was director. Hooker and John Lubbock also became trustees of the Henry Christie bequest, which was used by the British Museum to buy approximately 20,000 prehistoric and ethnographic artefacts for its collection, which remain in that collection today. Although Grant Duff, Huxley and Tyndall did not directly source material for John's collection, their relationship with John often brought them into contact with John's obsession during the 1860s and 1870s. For example, Grant Duff accompanied John on trips to Hisarlik and to Egypt during the early 1870s, where collecting took place. Huxley and Tyndall met up with John to go mountain climbing in the Alps, their particular obsession, during one of his trips to Switzerland, visiting the lake villages in 1862. And this slide shows that the area that they went to was the Jungfrau region of Switzerland. You've got the Aletsch Glacier on the bottom left. And this image here is of an incident that happened as they were climbing the Jungfrau, where one of their porters fell into a crevasse. That image captures John Tyndall and the second porter rescuing the poor victim of the fall, and off camera, off shot if you like, holding the other end of the rope, is likely to have been John Lubbock et al. Just outside of that shot. The quote from John Tyndall in a letter to John Lubbock in 1863 comes from a very playful, jibing letter from John Tyndall to John Lubbock, having a little bit of a dig at him about his interest in archaeology and all things dead, as opposed to the beautiful mountains that Tyndall loved. The final name on the door to mention is Charles, who was John's great scientific mentor and who immersed John in the importance of detailed observation and evidence from an early age, including the value of collecting and researching specimens. John studied material Darwin had collected during his voyage on HMS Beagle and published his findings during the 1850s. This early scientific education undoubtedly influenced John's interest and approach to collecting material evidence for human antiquity. And Darwin was one of the first to give John artefacts for his collection, including a bone harpoon, illustrated here, from Tierra del Fuego, which he gave to John in 1864. So in conclusion, the hand-painted door names and collecting relationships reinforce in a very material way the idea that these people knew and understood each other, although they did not always agree, and worked with each other very effectively to achieve change on a national stage. In human society, we tend to remember perhaps the charismatic and strong ideas makers or leaders, such as Darwin and perhaps Huxley.
However, change is a much more of a team effort than this. Relationships, networks both formal and informal, and a diversity of skills and connections are key to the development and advocacy of ideas. Now you'll have to bear with me. In preparing this short paper, I've been of a book about
change management I came across a while ago, which draws on a fable involving a colony of penguins, climate change, and a diminishing habitat. It sets out a series of phases in managing change, to set the stage by creating a sense of urgency and pulling together the guiding team, to decide what to do by developing the change vision and strategy, and then to make it happen and make it stick. I'm particularly drawn to the idea of a guiding team, a powerful group guiding the change with leadership, credibility, communications, authority, and analytical skills. I leave you with this final thought. It would be interesting to analyse the X Club and Lubbock Evans network further in this context of change management. It most definitely has the attributes of a guiding team. Thank you.